The kitchen of Les Jardins Blancs was a world of controlled chaos, a roaring beast that Elena Vasquez fed with clean plates and quiet obedience. Here, her world was the hiss of the steam dishwasher, the clatter of silverware, and the low, urgent shouts of the chefs. Her hands, which felt most alive when they were dancing, were now always a little damp, a little sore from carrying heavy trays. She moved like a ghost between the hot kitchen and the cold, elegant dining room, a space so quiet you could hear the gentle clink of a wine glass from across the room. The dining room was like a beautiful painting she wasn't allowed to be in. Plush carpets swallowed all sound. The walls were a soft cream, and the lights were dim and golden, making everyone look a little more important. In the very center of it all, like a king on a throne, was the piano. It was a huge, shiny black Steinway grand. To Elena, it wasn't just furniture. It was a living thing. Sometimes, when she was setting a table nearby, she would catch the scent of old wood and felt from inside it, a smell that reminded her of home, of her old life. That old life felt like a dream now. She had spent years in practice rooms that smelled of dust and sweat, her fingers aching as they chased impossible passages. Her parents had given up so much, her father driving a cab for double shifts, her mother sewing late into the night all to pay for her lessons, and the small, upright piano that filled their apartment. They called it their biggest investment, but they meant in her happiness, not in money. Then things got harder. Her father got sick, and the expensive conservatory had to become a memory. The piano in their apartment was sold to pay bills. The music didn't leave her, but it got locked away. A private treasure she carried, inside Dot at Le Jardin Blanc. The piano was just for show. Mr. Harrington, the manager, said it was atmosphere. He was a man who walked as if he was smelling something bad all the time. His suit always perfectly pressed, his eyes missing nothing. Every night, quiet classical music would play through hidden speakers. It was always the same safe, boring playlist. The customers come for the food and the peace, not for a concert, he told the staff. The piano is art to look at, not to hear. Remember that. Elena remembered. She remembered every time she passed it. Her fingers would twitch at her side, tracing scales on the fabric of her black server's apron. She would sometimes, when no one was looking, let a single finger brush against the cool, smooth edge of its lid. It was like touching a memory. One Saturday night, the restaurant was full of its usual crowd. Men in sharp suits laughed quietly. Women in beautiful dresses sparkled under the lights. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and seared steak. Elena was balancing 3 heavy plates on her arms, her muscles tight, focusing on not making a sound. That's when she heard the complaint. It was a voice like sharp ice, cutting through the gentle murmur. A woman at table 7, dressed in a severe, elegant dress, was waving a hand in the air. She wasn't waving at anyone, just waving in annoyance. "This music," the woman said, her voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "It's tinny. It's like listening to a poor recording in a department store. It's completely ruining the ambiance of this place." Elena quickly delivered her plates and, as the closest employee, was pulled into the storm. Mr. Harrington appeared instantly, his face a worried smile. "Mrs. Thorne, my deepest apologies. What seems to be the issue?" "The music, Harrington," Mrs. Thorne said, not using his first name. "It's cheap. It's offensive. Turn it off or fix it, now." Mr. Harrington's eyes darted around. He couldn't fix the speakers. He just wanted the problem to disappear. His gaze landed on Elena, standing there holding an empty tray. He saw a solution, but not a good one. He saw a way to shift the blame Dot in a voice that was a harsh whisper, but loud enough for Mrs. Thorne and the neighboring tables to catch. He spoke to Elena. "You see? Your clattering around has distracted our guest from the atmosphere." He then gestured impatiently toward the grand piano. "Don't just stand there. Go over and look like you're checking the instrument. Make it seem like we're servicing the problem. Be useful for once." The words hit Elena like a physical slap. The heat rushed to her face, burning her cheeks and ears. A few people nearby looked away, embarrassed for her. Others watched with mild curiosity. She was being turned into a decoration, a prop in a play to calm a rich woman's temper. The shame was a thick, hot liquid filling her throat. Her feet, feeling like blocks of wood, carried her the short distance to the piano. She stood stiffly beside it, her hand resting on its dark, polished wood. She could feel the vibration of the bad recording humming through it. She looked out at the sea of faces, some pitying, most indifferent, all seeing only a humiliated waitress. Inside her chest, a storm was raging. She thought of her father's tired, proud smile after her recitals. She thought of her mother's hands, rough from work, gently braiding her hair before a competition. She thought of the feel of the keys, the way a melody could hold every feeling she couldn't say out loud. This piano, this beautiful, silent beast, was just another thing in this room that people like Mrs. Thorne and Mr. Harrington owned, but did not understand. They heard price tags. She heard poetry. The recorded sonata droned on, tinny and weak. The shame began to cool and harden inside her. It wasn't soft anymore. It was sharp. It was a decision. Her heart was beating so hard, she was sure the whole restaurant could hear it. Without allowing herself another second to think, to be afraid, she moved. With a quiet, deliberate motion, she lifted the long, heavy lid that covered the keys. It opened with a soft, satisfying thump that seemed incredibly loud in the hushed tension. She pulled out the plush, velvet-covered bench and sat down. The familiar feel of the bench, the perfect distance from the keys, was like a homecoming. A final, faint murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "What is she doing?" But most just stared in confused silence. Elena placed her hands in her lap for a moment, took a breath that filled her lungs with courage, and then gently laid her fingers on the cool, waiting ivory. For a long second, there was only silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a thick, waiting one. Alana's hands rested on the keys. She could see her own reflection, pale and serious, in the dark, glossy wood above the keyboard. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mr. Harrington take a sharp step forward, his face a mask of pure horror. He looked like he wanted to shout, to run over and drag her away, but he was frozen, caught between anger and the fear of making an even bigger scene. The first notes she played were soft. They were gentle, like someone sighing. It was the beginning of Chopin's Nocturne, piece she had played 1,000 times in her small bedroom, when the world outside was too loud or too sad. The melody was a simple, questioning line, full of a quiet loneliness. It drifted out into the restaurant, delicate as smoke dot at first. Nothing changed. The low murmur of conversation continued. A waiter walked by with a bottle of wine. A man at a corner table laughed at something his friend said. They all thought it was just a new recording, something better that the manager had put on to fix the problem. It was pretty, but it was still just background music. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. She stopped seeing the expensive clothes and the judging faces. She forgot about the apron tied around her waist. In her mind, she was back at her old piano, the one her parents had sold. The sunlight would come through the window in the afternoon and fall across her hands. She could almost smell her mother's cooking from the kitchen. The music was her secret world, and she was letting them all peek inside. Her left hand began to move, adding deep, rolling chords underneath the right hand's sad melody. The music began to swell. It wasn't loud, but it grew richer, fuller, like a story getting more complicated. The beautiful, aching heart of the piece began to unfold. The notes weren't just pretty sounds anymore. They were feelings. You could hear a longing for something lost, a memory of a sweeter time. It was too real, too emotional to be a machine playing. One by one, the conversations died. The man who was laughing stopped mid-chuckle, his fork hovering in the air. The waiters, trained to be invisible, stopped moving and just listened. Mrs. Thorne, who had started all of this, slowly put down her wine glass. Her sharp, angry face softened, then changed to something like confusion, and then, slowly, to wonder. She wasn't hearing a recording. She was hearing a heart. Elena's body began to move with the music, just a little. A slight sway of her shoulders, a dip of her head. A real living person was feeling this, and it was impossible to look away. The recorded music from before felt cheap and dead compared to this. This was alive. Then, as the last lingering note of the nocturne faded into the air, Elena didn't stop. She didn't get up. She took one more deep breath, gathered all the energy in the room, the shock, the attention, the silence, and let it explode. Her fingers flew into the next piece. This was no sad, dreaming melody. This was a storm. It was Liszt's La Campanella, a wild, dizzying dance of notes that sounded like 1,000 tiny bells ringing at the speed of light. Her right hand became a blur, leaping and dancing across the keys with impossible speed and perfect accuracy. The left hand pounded out powerful, rhythmic chords that you could feel in your chest. The transformation was complete. The shy, humiliated server was gone. In her place was a powerhouse, a master of her craft. Her face was focused, intense, a little smile touching her lips not from happiness, but from the sheer, challenging joy of it. She was in complete control, taming a wild beast of sound. Now, every single person was transfixed. A woman at the front put a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. An older gentleman leaned forward, elbows on the table, staring as if he was witnessing a magic trick. A busboy, hiding by the kitchen door, forgot about the dirty plates in his hands. Mr. Harrington's anger had completely melted away. He just stood there, his mouth slightly open, looking from Elena to the stunned, respectful faces of his customers. He was realizing too late what he had been employing all this time. The music was physical. It filled every corner of the opulent room. It rattled the delicate crystals on the chandeliers. It vibrated through the floor. It wasn't something you just listened to. It was something you experienced. Fast sections sounded like a laughing waterfall. The quiet, tense moments were so quiet you could hear the hiss of a candle flame. Then it would burst back into a joyful, thunderous run-up and down the piano. For 3 full minutes, no one ate. No one drank. No one spoke. They were all passengers on a journey she was steering. They forgot about the expensive food growing cold on their plates. They forgot about their business deals and their dates. All that existed was the girl in the server's uniform and the incredible world she was building out of sound out as she neared the end. The piece became even more furious, a final, breathtaking sprint to the finish line. Her fingers moved so fast they seemed to be in 6 places at once. And then, with one last, crashing, glorious chord that shook the piano and echoed through the silent room, it was over. Her hands fell still. The final note hung in the air, and then faded into a silence that was deeper and more profound than anything that had come before. It was the kind of silence that is full of sound that is just finished. Elena kept her head down for a moment, her chest rising and falling quickly. She was back in her body, back in the restaurant. The storm inside her was calm. She slowly looked up. What she saw was not what she had left. Every single person in the dining room was looking at her. And then, one man at the back, moved by a force he didn't try to control, began to clap. It was a single solid clap. Then the woman next to him joined. And then, like a dam breaking, the entire restaurant erupted. They weren't just clapping. They were standing up, pushing their chairs back, raising their voices in cheers and shouts of bravo. The sound was deafening, a wave of pure, human appreciation that washed over her. It was the loudest, most real sound the beautiful, silent room had ever heard. The applause was a physical thing. It hit Elena like a warm wind, so loud and full it made the air in the room feel thick. She sat on the velvet bench, her hands still resting lightly on the keys that were now quiet. For a few seconds, she just breathed, listening to the sound she had created. It wasn't just clapping. It was whoops, shouts, the stamping of feet. The quiet, fancy restaurant had turned into a concert hall. She finally stood up. Her legs felt a little shaky, like she had just stepped off a fast-moving ride. She turned to face the room full of standing people, their faces all turned towards her, smiling, some even wiping tears from their eyes. She didn't know what to do, so she just gave a small, quick bow from her waist. This made them cheer even louder. The heat in her face was no longer from shame. It was from a flood of feelings she couldn't even name. Her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Mr. Harrington. He was still standing where he had frozen earlier, near the kitchen door. But his expression was completely different. The horror was gone. Now he looked stunned, like someone had just told him the sky was green. He was clapping too, but slowly, mechanically, as if his brain was still trying to catch up with what his eyes had seen. Then the crowd started to move. People weren't just clapping from their tables anymore. They began to come towards her. A man in a beautifully tailored suit was the first to reach the piano. He had kind eyes and silver hair. That was extraordinary, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, crisp white card. He held it out to her. My name is on this. I conduct the City Symphony. I would be deeply honored if you would call my office on Monday. We must talk. Elena took the card with fingers that suddenly felt numb. The thick, embossed paper felt real in her hand. She could only nod, her throat too tight to say thank you. Before she could even look at the card, others surrounded her. A woman in a sparkling dress grasped her hand. You made me feel things I haven't felt in years, she said, her eyes shining. Where did you learn to play like that? Another person, a younger man, simply said, You just killed it. That was the coolest thing I've ever seen. The words washed over her. A jumble of compliments and questions. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mrs. Thorne, the woman who had started it all, walking purposefully through the crowd. Elena braced herself, not knowing what to expect. Would she be angry? Would she complain that the show was too loud? Mrs. Thorne stopped in front of her. She looked different. The hard, pinched look around her mouth was gone. She looked older and softer. She didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at Elena, really looked at her, not through her. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was quiet, meant only for Elena to hear. I owe you an apology, she said. The words seemed difficult for her to say. I was rude. To the music and to you. She paused, glancing at the magnificent piano. I have heard that piece played in grand halls by famous men. I have never heard it played like that. You didn't just play the notes. You told the truth. She gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of deep respect from someone who rarely gave it. Then she turned and walked back to her table, leaving Elena even more stunned than before. The manager finally broke from his trance. He moved through the crowd, a nervous smile plastered on his face. All right, everyone please, let's give our musician some space, he said, his voice too high. He came up to Elena, his hands fluttering. He looked at her apron, then at the conductor's card in her hand, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Elena," he said, using her name for the first time she could remember. "Why don't you? Take the rest of the night off? With full pay, of course. You've certainly contributed to the ambience." He laughed a little, a hollow, awkward sound. Elena looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of having been so wrong, the fear of this getting out and making him look bad. She didn't feel angry anymore. She just felt distant from him, like he was a character from a boring story she had finished reading. "Thank you," she said simply. Her own voice sounded strange to her, calm and clear. She untied the black apron from around her waist. The strings came loose easily. She folded it once, neatly, and held it out to him. He looked at it like it was a strange object, then slowly took it from her hands. Without the apron, she felt different, lighter. She was just a young woman in a simple black dress, standing by a grand piano. She picked up the conductor's card from where she had placed it on the piano lid. She gave one last look at the room, at the people who were still talking excitedly, pointing at the piano, at her. She saw the busboy grinning at her from the kitchen doorway, giving her 2 big thumbs up. She walked out of the dining room, not through the hot, noisy kitchen, but through the main entrance, past the mahogany host stand. The night air outside was cool and sharp. It felt amazing on her skin. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with it. She started walking down the street, the sounds of the city cars, distant sirens, people talking filling her ears. They were ordinary sounds, but they sounded new. In her pocket, her fingers found her phone. She stopped under a street lamp, its yellow light cooling around her. She opened her phone and pressed the number she knew by heart. It rang only once before it was answered. "Mia? Is everything okay? You're not finished work yet." Her mother's voice was laced with the usual worry. Elena leaned against the lamppost, a smile spreading across her face for the first time all night. A real, easy smile. "Mama," she said, her voice full of a quiet wonder, "you won't believe what just happened. Sit down. I need to tell you a story." The walk home was unlike any walk she had ever taken. The city, usually just a blur of tired shapes and loud noises after her shift, felt sharp and clear. The honking of a taxi sounded like a musical note. The glow of the streetlights looked like spotlights on a stage just for her. She kept touching the business card in her pocket, feeling the raised letters of the conductor's name through the thick paper. It was a tiny, solid piece of proof that what happened was real. When she pushed open the door to her family's apartment, the warm, familiar smell of old wood and cooked beans wrapped around her. Her mother was sitting at the small kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling in front of her, her face tight with worry. The story spilled out of Elena in a rush. She didn't start at the beginning with the complaint. She started in the middle, with the feel of the piano keys under her fingers. "He made me stand by the piano, Mama, like I was a piece of furniture, and everyone was looking at me with pity. So I sat down." Her mother listened, her hands clasped tightly together. As Elena described the music, the silence, and then the roaring applause, her mother's worried frown melted away. Her eyes grew wider and brighter. When Elena told her about the conductor's card, a single tear escaped and rolled down her mother's cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. "You played?" her father asked from the doorway of his bedroom. He was leaning on his cane, his body tired from a long day of recovery, but his eyes were fully awake. "In front of all those people?" Elena nodded, going to him. She took his free hand. "I played your favorite, Papa, the Chopin, and then the fast one, the Liszt." Her father squeezed her hand. His voice was a rough whisper. "I always knew. I always heard it, even when you thought no one was listening. He looked over at her mother. We have to call your tia and your brother. They have to hear this. For the next hour, the small apartment was filled with a different kind of noise. The excited, rapid-fire sound of family on the phone, voices talking over each other in happiness. It was loud and messy and perfect. It was the sound of her real life. And for the first time in a long time, her music was a part of it. Not something separate she had to hide away. Later, in the quiet of her own small room, the doubts began to creep in. She pulled the card out again. The City Symphony. It was a giant, important place. The conductor had been nice in the moment, but would he even remember her tomorrow? Maybe he gave out cards like this to be polite. Maybe it was just a gesture. The excitement felt dangerous, like building a castle on sand. That Monday morning arrived. The ordinary sun shone through her window. The fear was a cold rock in her stomach. What if she called and the secretary laughed? What if the conductor said, "Who?" Oh, the waitress. That was a nice party trick. She held the phone for a long time, staring at the numbers. Finally, she took a breath and dialed. The voice that answered was professional and smooth. Maestro's office. How may I help you? Hello, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat. My name is Elena Vasquez. The maestro gave me his card on Saturday night and asked me to call. There was a pause on the other end. A rustle of paper. Then the secretary's voice changed. It became warmer, immediate. Elena, yes, of course. He's been waiting for your call. He's in a meeting until 11, but he asked me to schedule an appointment with you the moment you contacted us. Could you come in this Wednesday afternoon, say, at 2 o'clock? The cold rock in Elena's stomach dissolved, replaced by a fluttering of wings. Yes, she said. Yes, I can be there. The next 2 days were a strange kind of torture. She went through the motions of her normal life, but her mind was somewhere else. She didn't go back to the restaurant. She knew, and Mr. Harrington knew, that her time there was over. She spent hours at the public library, using their internet to research the conductor, to listen to recordings of his orchestra, trying to prepare for a meeting she didn't know how to prepare for. Wednesday came. She wore the only nice dress she owned, a simple blue one. She took the bus downtown, her hands clenched in her lap. The Symphony Hall was a massive, beautiful old building made of stone, with tall columns that made her feel very small. She walked through the big front doors into a huge, echoing lobby. It was empty and quiet, a temple to sound. The secretary, a friendly woman with glasses, greeted her with a smile. He's ready for you. Go right in. The conductor's office was not what she expected. It wasn't a cold, formal room. It was messy and alive. Sheet music was piled everywhere. There were framed pictures on the walls of orchestras and famous musicians. 2 comfortable-looking chairs sat facing a large, cluttered desk. And in the corner, there was a small, upright piano, its lid open. The conductor himself stood up as she entered. He looked more approachable than he had in the dark restaurant. Elena, he said, coming around the desk and shaking her hand firmly. I am so very glad you came. Please sit. He didn't sit behind his big desk. He pulled the other chair around to sit near her. I haven't been able to stop thinking about Saturday night, he began. That was not just skilled playing. That was communication. You took a room full of strangers and made them feel something together. That is a rare gift. He asked her about her training, about her family, about why she had stopped. She told him, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. He listened, nodding, never interrupting. Here is what I propose, he said finally. My orchestra has a program for young artists of exceptional promise. It's a mentorship. You would work with our pianist, you would attend rehearsals, You would have practice space here, 24 hours a day. And in 6 months, there is a spot for a soloist in one of our smaller lunchtime concerts. I would like you to prepare for that." Elena felt the room spin a little. A soloist? With an orchestra? The words didn't seem real. "It's not a full-time job at first," he continued, seeing her shock. "There is a small stipend, enough to help, but you would likely need another job for a while. But it is a path, a real one." He stood up and walked to the small piano. He played a single chord. "The instrument is here for you, starting today. This is not a gift, Elena. This is an investment. I am investing in what I heard, which was a musician who has something necessary to say." He turned to look at her. "The question is, are you ready to say it?" Elena looked from his kind, serious face to the waiting piano. She thought of the grand piano at the restaurant, beautiful and silent. She thought of the one her parents sold, full of love and sacrifice. This piano in the corner wasn't as fancy as the first, and it wasn't as loved as the second. But it was a door, and it was opened up. She stood up. Her legs felt steady. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." The next few months were a beautiful, exhausting whirlwind. Elena's life split into 2 clear halves. There was the old life, early mornings at a new job in a quiet bookstore, making coffee and stacking shelves. It was simple work, but it didn't weigh on her soul. Her coworkers were kind, and they knew about her other life, speaking about it in hushed, proud tones. The other half of her life belonged to the symphony hall. The heavy glass doors no longer intimidated her. They welcomed her. The security guards knew her by name and would wave her in with a smile. The small, upright piano in the conductor's office became her sanctuary, but he soon gave her the key to a proper practice room in the basement. It was a plain, windowless box with a good piano, a chair, and a single light. To Elena, it was a palace. Her days fell into a new rhythm. Bookstore shifts ended in the early afternoon. Then she would take the bus across town, her mind already humming with music. In the practice room, the world outside ceased to exist. She worked with the orchestra's principal pianist, a stern but brilliant woman who didn't give compliments easily. When she finally nodded after a difficult passage and said, "Good, now do it again," it felt like winning a gold medal. She wasn't just practicing alone. The conductor, true to his word, made her a part of things. She was allowed to sit in on orchestra rehearsals, tucked into a corner with a score on her lap. At first, the sheer wall of sound was overwhelming, the rich growl of the cellos, the sharp cry of the violins, the thunder of the timpani, all blending into one powerful beast of music. She learned to listen differently, to hear how her single piano would one day have to speak clearly within that storm dot. She started to recognize the faces of the musicians. The young violinist who always arrived late, rushing in with an apologetic grin. The elderly cellist who could make his instrument sound like a human voice. They were just people. They got tired, they made jokes, they got frustrated. But when the conductor raised his baton, they became one thing, something much bigger than themselves. Elena watched, and she learned. She learned about discipline, about listening, about being a piece of a grand puzzle dot at home. The apartment felt different. The shadow of struggle was still there. Her father's health was a slow journey. The bills were still tight, but a new light had been switched on. Her mother would shush everyone when Elena called to describe her day. She worked with the maestro today. Her mother would whisper proudly to a visiting aunt, as if it was a state secret. Her father no longer asked if she was tired from work. He asked, how did the music go today? The weeks turned into months. The piece she was to perform, a challenging piano concerto by a Russian composer, began to live under her skin. She practiced until the notes were in her muscles, in her bones. She wasn't just playing it correctly. She was starting to play it with her own voice, with the story of her year, the shame, the silence, the defiant hope. The day of the lunchtime concert arrived. It was a Thursday. The sky was a soft gray. Elena felt a strange calm. This wasn't like the restaurant. That had been a rebellion, a lightning bolt of emotion. This was a promise she was about to keep. The concert was in the hall's smaller auditorium. It was about half full, with an audience of retirees, students, and office workers on their lunch break. They chatted softly, rustling programs. From the side of the stage, Elena peeked out. She saw her family sitting in the third row. Her mother was clutching a tissue, her father sitting tall, his hand on his cane. Seeing them there, in this place, made her heart swell. The orchestra tuned, a glorious cacophony that settled into a single pure note. The conductor walked on stage to polite applause. He gave a short, warm introduction. Today's soloist is a remarkable young artist who reminds us that great talent can be found anywhere, often in the places we least expect. It is my great pleasure to introduce... Her name echoed in the hall. Elena walked out. She wasn't wearing a server's uniform or a simple blue dress. She wore a borrowed black gown from the symphony's wardrobe department. It felt strange and elegant. She nodded to the conductor, shook the concertmaster's hand, and settled herself at the grand piano, a majestic instrument that dwarfed the one from the restaurant. She looked at the conductor. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile and raised his baton. The orchestra began with a slow, mysterious introduction. The sound washed over her. Then the conductor looked at her, and it was her turn. Her first entry was a series of quiet, questioning chords. The sound of the piano, her piano, rang out clear and true in the hall. This time, there was no shock, no stunned silence from an ignorant crowd. There was respectful, attentive quiet from an audience who had come to listen as the music unfolded. Elena forgot about the people, the borrowed dress, the importance of the moment. She was back in the story. The angry technical passages were her frustration. The lyrical singing melodies were her memories of home and family. The powerful, triumphant finale was the feeling of walking out of the restaurant into the cool night air, free. When the last crashing chord ended, the connection she felt was different. It wasn't the explosive surprise of the restaurant, but a deeper, warmer wave of appreciation. The applause was sustained and knowledgeable. People rose to their feet. Her father, with some effort, stood too, his face proud and wet with tears. Backstage was a blur of handshakes and well-dones. The conductor put a firm hand on her shoulder. "You see?" he said quietly. "This is only the beginning." But the moment that would stick with her forever came later, after the crowd had left. She had changed back into her ordinary clothes and was heading out through the now empty lobby. One of the elderly stagehands, a man who moved scenery and who she'd said hello to 100 times, was mopping the floor. He leaned on his mop as she passed. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice gravelly. He'd never said more than good morning to her before. She stopped. "Yes?" He nodded slowly, looking at her with eyes that had seen decades of performers come and go. "I listened from the back door. You know, most of them, they play the notes." He tapped his ear. You played the why." He gave her a wink and went back to mopping. Elena walked out into the afternoon. The gray sky had broken, and a little sun was shining through. She didn't feel like a star or a hero. She felt like a pianist. The humiliated server was a memory, a character from a story she would tell one day. The girl who played the why was the one walking home, already thinking about the next piece, the next practice, the next step on a path that was finally, undeniably, her own.